look at your plasma. Okay. So the plasma is the liquid portion of your blood, okay, and most of it is water. Okay? About 91.5% of the plasma of your blood is water. 7% of that is protein, okay, proteins that are in your blood. There's different kinds of proteins. Here you have albumins, globulins, and fibrinogens. Albumins are proteins that are in the blood that are basically responsible for maintaining osmosis, or like the movement of water across the capillary walls from the blood into like your cells of your tissues. Okay, the albumins are responsible for making sure that that's happening how it needs to happen. The water's going to where it needs to go. Okay, that's what the albumins are doing. The globulins, these are going to be things like antibodies, so they're going to be responsible for your immune response, part of your immune response in keeping you healthy. And then fibrinogens, those are responsible for clotting. Okay, so when you cut yourself and your blood clots, you have these fibrinogens, which are in your plasma, help with that clotting process. All right. Other things that are in your blood are things like electrolytes, nutrients, gases, hormones, vitamins, waste products, all of that stuff is getting carried in the plasma of your blood, right? And getting transported around your body. Okay, so that's the plasma. Then you have formed elements, things that are created and are in your blood. Those things are your red blood cells, your white blood cells, and your platelets. Okay? Red blood cells are responsible for carrying the oxygen and carbon dioxide around in your body. The white blood cells are responsible for your immune response. And then platelets are responsible for clotting. Okay? So platelets down here, responsible for clotting. So, white blood cells, we kind of group them into two different categories. We say that they're either granular leukocytes or agranular leukocytes, and how we get that is in order to be able to see these under a microscope, you have to stain them. All right, so if you were to just take blood, your own blood, and stick it under a microscope and try to look at it, you wouldn't really actually be able to see the white blood cells. Okay, we actually have to put like a stain or a dye in there so that the white blood cells get stained, and then when we look at it under the microscope, we can see it. And when that happens, certain kinds of white blood cells that are called granular leukocytes, when they get stained, they look polka dotted. Okay, they've got like little granules of stuff inside of the cell. Whereas agranular leukocytes don't have that. Okay, so that's why we call them granular and agranular leukocytes. So neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils, we'll talk more about those. But those are granular leukocytes, and then agranular are lymphocytes and monocytes. Again, we'll talk more about that. Okay, so here, I believe you have this picture in your notes, right? This is an actual breakdown of your blood and what's found in your blood. So your blood makes up about 8% of your body weight, okay, and your other fluids and tissues make up the rest of your body weight. And if you were to take that blood and break it down, you have 55% of its plasma, and the 45% is the formed elements. Take the plasma, break that down. Most of it's water, 7% protein, and 1.5% other stuff. Proteins, talked about the albumins, globulins, and fibrinogens, and the other things, electrolytes, nutrients, gases, that stuff. Okay, so that's all found in your plasma. The formed elements, okay, we have platelets, white blood cells, and red blood cells. Red blood cells make up like approximately 99% of all of the formed elements, and everything else is platelets and white blood cells. So most everything of the formed elements is your red blood cells. And then if you take the white blood cells, you can break it down into all of the different kinds of white blood cells. Okay? But you won't have to know those yet. Does that make sense? Yes? No? Maybe so? Okay. Okay, so how do we form these red blood cells, which are so critical for carrying all of the oxygen around and picking up all of the carbon dioxide? Well, You form them through a process that's called hemopoiesis or hematopoiesis. So if you hear either of those terms, it's the same thing. Okay. This does occur throughout your life. It occurs even when you're an embryo inside your mom. Just changes locations as to where that actually happens. But it happens throughout your entire life. When you, about 3 months before you're born, the formation of your red blood cells moves to the areas where you now form red blood cells, which is like in your pectoral girdle, so like in your scapula and stuff like that. Also in your pelvic girdle, so in your pelvis. Okay, and then also at the tops of your femur and the tops of your humerus. And that's where you find your red bone marrow, where you're going to be forming your blood. Okay, and where this process of hemopoiesis is going to be taking place. Okay, that's where it's found. So in that red bone marrow, you have these things that are called pluripotent stem cells. And a pluripotent stem cell is a stem cell that's able to become a variety of different cells. Okay, so it's able to become a lot of different cells. These pluripotent stem cells in your red bone marrow are able to become all of your different blood cell types. Okay, so you have a hormone that gets produced that causes these pluripotent stem cells in your red bone marrow to divide and become either lymphoid stem cells or myeloid stem cells. Okay, so this pluripotent one divides and becomes the lymphoid or the myeloid stem cells. Lymphoid stem cells are going to start developing in the red bone marrow, and then once they reach a certain point, they're going to go to like your lymph nodes, okay, to continue to develop. Okay, so it starts in your red bone marrow, goes to your lymph nodes in order to continue to develop, and will become the lymphocytes, okay, which are like some of your white blood cells. Okay, so lymphoid stem cells go to your lymphatic tissues. The myeloid stem cells are going to become all of your other white blood cells, as well as your red blood cells and your platelets. Okay, so you take like one cell, pluripotent stem cell, hormones cause it to divide, become the myeloid and the lymphoid. Lymphoid goes to the lymphatic tissue and develops into your lymphocytes. The myeloid stays in your red blood bone marrow and becomes all of the rest of the white blood cells, your red blood cells, and your platelets. Does that make sense? Okay, so here's a picture. So pluripotent stem cell is the myeloid, which can then become red blood cells and platelets, and then some types of white blood cells. And then the lymphoid stem cell, the lymphatic tissue, and become T and B lymphocytes. Okay. I believe, if I remember this correctly, AIDS is actually when AIDS attack the T lymphocytes right here. So they remove this type of white blood cell. And when they remove this type of white blood cell, your immune response is drastically reduced. And so people that have AIDS, they don't have the T lymphocytes in order to be able to fight off infections. And so they die of a common cold or pneumonia or something like that. Okay, so that's actually the problem with AIDS. It's acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. Okay, so you get this virus, kills those cells, and your immune response is lowered. So, okay, so here's the actual staining of the different kinds of cells. So this is your blood under a microscope once the white blood cells have been stained. Okay, and so all of these little like dots, okay, those are your red blood cells. And then these things right here, these are different kinds of white blood cells. See that? Okay, so if you were to take your blood, stain it, look at it under a microscope, that's what you would see. So here's your granular leukocytes. See how they kind of look like we've got like a bunch of these like little polka dot things in there? Do you see that? Kind of? Yeah? Shake your head yes if you see that. Okay, thank you. And so that's why they're called granular leukocytes, because when you look at them stained, they have the little polka dot. So this is an eosinophil, a basophil, and a neutrophil. And then here's your agranular leukocytes, your monocytes, and a lymphocyte. Okay? So that's what your blood looks like. Those are the formed elements of your blood. Okay, so let's look at your red blood cells. because your red blood cells are pretty cool and pretty important. So your red blood cells are called red blood cells because they look red. And the reason why they actually look red is because of this pigment that's in there that's called hemoglobin. Okay? And hemoglobin is the pigment that is responsible for carrying oxygen and some carbon dioxide. And it looks red because it has iron in it. Okay? And when iron and oxygen interact, okay, it turns a bright red. That's rust on your car. Iron oxide is the red rust that'll get on cars and metal and stuff. Okay? So your blood looks red because you've got the iron in your blood and the oxygen, which makes it look that bright red color when the two combine. All right? So hemoglobin carries most of the oxygen in your blood and about a quarter of the carbon dioxide in your blood. How many red blood cells do you have? Well, in 1 microliter of blood, you have about 5 million red blood cells. A drop of blood, if you were to cut yourself, okay, and just have like 1 single drop of blood, that's 50 microliters. Okay, so 50 times 5 million is a lot of red blood cells in a single drop of blood. Okay, so you have tons of red blood cells in your body. Okay, and males actually have more than females. So we say it's about 5 million, but men actually have 5.4 million red blood cells, and females have 4.8 million. 5's just kind of in the middle. Okay, and again, that difference is because of blood or body size. Right? So men need more red blood cells. So structure of a red blood cell. Red blood cells are one of the only cell in your body that does not have a nucleus. Okay, so all other cells in your body have nuclei, which contain all of your genetic information. Okay, red blood cells do not have a nuclei, and the reason for that is they kick it out. They get rid of it. And they do that because a nucleus takes up too much space. And basically, red blood cells, their purpose is to carry oxygen and have tons and tons of hemoglobin. They're basically like sacks full of hemoglobin to carry oxygen. And that nucleus would take up too much space, so they kick it out. Okay, say, get out of here. Get rid of the nucleus and fill it up with hemoglobin. Okay, so if you were to commit a crime and you were to leave only red blood cells at the scene, no sort of like skin cells or white blood cells or any other kinds of cells, they would not be able to tell who you are based on your genetic information because they wouldn't have any genetic information. Does that make sense? Okay, so red blood cells do not have a nucleus. So no nucleus. Red blood cells only live for about 3 to 4 months before they get recycled. And they have this kind of crazy biconcave shape. So I'm really bad at drawing. So here's kind of the red blood cells. Yeah, these are red blood cells. So biconcave means it's concave on either side. All right. So this side kind of comes in, and this side kind of comes in, and you connect the two like that. Okay. So it's a biconcave disc. So it's round, and it's got like a little dip in either side. Does that make sense? Okay, so if you looked at it from the top, okay, it would be like indented in the middle. Kind of like a little donut shape that hasn't had the middle poked out. Does that make sense? Okay, and the reason for this shape is it actually has, this shape has more surface area than like a square or even just a plain circle would have. Okay. And that's good because that means it's got more surface area to gather oxygen and more surface area to release oxygen. So this shape is actually super important for the red blood cell. And it couldn't have this shape if it had a nucleus. Okay? And the shape is also super helpful for when these red blood cells are going through the capillaries of your body. So capillaries are the smallest type of blood vessel. And in capillaries, red blood cells can only go through one at a time. So they go through single file. It's pretty small, okay? And so in order to be able to fit through these capillaries, they need to have this biconcave disc that is kind of flexible, right? to be able to fit through these little capillaries. So allows for maximal surface area for maximum gas exchange, and allows for them to be flexible to fit through your lovely capillaries. Does that make sense? Yes? Shake your head yes. Okay. So those are your red blood cells. Okay. So red blood cells live for about 120 days, 3 to 4 months, before they die, okay, or are damaged, or just get burst in a capillary and the pieces are circulating through your blood. And so your body recognizes those red blood cells that are dead or damaged or just the pieces of the red blood cells. And you have macrophages, which are cells that eat other cells, in your liver and your spleen. Okay? And so those macrophages are kind of like sensing in the blood, and they're like, oh, you're a damaged red blood cell, and then it eats that damaged red blood cell. Okay, so it takes it out of circulation. And then once it eats it, it actually recycles parts of it. Okay, so parts of it can be recycled and reused in your body to create new red blood cells, and parts of it cannot and get excreted, okay, as waste. You are taking out about 2 million red blood cells every second. Okay, so every second that you sit here, 2 million red blood cells gone. Okay, that also means that your body has to replace those at the same rate. So you have about 2 million red blood cells every second entering your bloodstream. Crazy, huh? A lot. All the time. Okay, so the red blood cells, there's about 2 million every second that get eaten. Parts of it gets recycled. Okay, so when they break open the cell, okay, really the most important thing that they're interested in is the hemoglobin molecule. Okay, that hemoglobin molecule is super, super important. So the rest of the cell gets digested and recycled, but we're looking at the hemoglobin molecule. So one individual molecule of the maybe thousands that were in that one red blood cell that were carrying oxygen. Okay, so hemoglobin molecule. So you have the heme part of the hemoglobin and the globin part of the hemoglobin. So 2 parts that kind of get stuck together. Does that make sense? Okay. So when you have a hemoglobin molecule and it gets recycled, you break it into the heme part and the globin part. Okay. The globin part, your cells take that, they break down the proteins, and they recycle the amino acids to build muscle or whatever your body needs. Okay. So that gets recycled. The heme part is different. So the heme part is the part that has the iron, right? This iron that is so important for carrying oxygen in your blood. Your body actually recycles the iron that you have. Okay, so when you take and break down those red blood cells, your body is hanging on to that precious iron and actually spending it, and it gets recycled and reused to form new red blood cells. Okay? So you don't really need to take iron supplements because your body recycles it, particularly guys, right? You don't really need to take iron supplements unless your doctor tells you to if you're anemic, but guys don't tend to get anemic. Girls, you may need to take an iron supplement every once in a while because you lose blood every month, right? So you lose iron every month. So you do need to actually have, sometimes, if you don't get enough through your diet and what you eat, then you may need to take an iron supplement. Okay, and if you don't have enough iron, you can become anemic and not have enough red blood cells, and you get weak and tired. And
what are they?
It can actually be toxic. So you don't want to take a lot of iron. Well, iron in your body, it acts as a free radical, and so it like rips electrons off of cells and does like bad stuff. So actually, when we recycle our iron, we have a special protein called transferrin that comes and attaches itself to the iron and takes the iron to your red bone marrow where it gets recycled. Because you can't just have free iron in your body. because it'll do bad things. So yeah, you don't want to take too much iron. It can be bad. Okay, so globin portion broken down. The heme portion is broken down into the iron and then the non-iron portion. The iron gets attached to this transferrin, okay, the special protein that takes that lovely iron and transports it and kind of acts as like its guide, like, come on, little iron, let's go to the red bone marrow. So it grabs onto the iron, takes it to the red bone marrow where it gets recycled to form more hemoglobin, to form more red blood cells. Okay, so you take your iron to your red bone marrow where you form new red blood cells. You also need vitamin B12 in order to be able to do that. So that's probably an important supplement to take if you need to. So the non-iron portion, okay, the non-iron portion of the hemoglobin, the heme part of the globin, gets converted to biliverdin, which gets converted to bilirubin. Okay, bilirubin is a yellow pigment. That bilirubin goes to the liver. If you have problems with the liver, you know how babies and people can get jaundice, right, where they turn yellow? Okay, that's because, yeah. So the bilirubin goes to the liver, and the liver puts the bilirubin into the bile. Okay, the bile gets secreted into your intestine. Okay, so that bilirubin gets put into your intestine. You have bacteria in your intestine that take that bilirubin and convert it into a bunch of other chemicals that exit in your feces. Okay, so when you poop, all of this other part of the hemoglobin molecule gets goes out in your poop. So here's a picture. Okay. Okay. So here's your red blood cells. Dead red blood cells get recycled. Hemoglobin gets broken into the globin part and the heme part. Globin gets converted to amino acid. That gets reused. Okay. The heme part, okay, the iron goes with transferrin, okay, to the liver, to your red bone marrow, where it gets recycled. Iron gets recycled. Heme, the non-iron portion, gets converted to biliverdin, to bilirubin, that's the yellow protein, goes to your liver, secreted in the bile into your small intestine, gets converted to a bunch of these other chemicals. The last thing it gets converted to is stercobilin, which has like a reddish-brown pigment color to it, which is what gives your poop its color. Okay? So your poop is like that brown, weird, nasty color because of the stercobilin in it that will actually, that comes from you recycling and breaking down red blood cells. Weird, yeah. That could be for a bunch of different reasons, and probably none of them good. So you could have like perforated colon or some sort of like ulcer in your intestines that